Well, good evening, folks, and welcome back to another episode of When It Was Real. This show focuses on the glory days of the WWF in the 70s, the perfect time to grow up as a professional wrestling fan. Now, I'm a hot dog and a handshake kind of guy, but the other guy, he's putting the fannies in the seats. He's the one and only Nikita Brezhnikov. Unfortunately, he's under the hood tonight. Got a little bit of audio difficulty, but Nikita, how are you, my friend?
Video. Audio's good. Video is the shits tonight.
Yeah, the drizzling. How's things out there on the West Coast?
Never mind. I'm happy. That's all I'll say.
That's all that counts.
Yes. And we have our wonderful friend, the one and only Sal Corrente. And that, Sal, you just believe me. First of all, how far back can you reach?
Oh, I would say probably around 1978. Everything else is secondhand or, watching a YouTube video or something.
I think we got plenty for tonight. But what I'm going to do is just come up with a quick word from our sponsor, and then we're going to chat with our very special guest. So hang on 1 second here.
Do it.
This is Benny Scala, the one and only player. Folks, I am beyond excited to be co-hosting this new show, When It Was Real. And I am just as excited to be announcing our new sponsor, the Free Spirited Company. Free Spirited is a phenomenal old-school clothing company that specializes in short and long-sleeve T-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, graphic tees, heck, even yoga pants. These T-shirts are, to quote Rocky's manager Mickey Goldmill, a wake of art. Yours truly will be rocking the Free Spirited merch on each and every episode of When It Was Real. Not only are these shirts eye-catching, but they are very comfortable as well. Like what you see? Please go to shopfreespirited.com and use our special code MP20 to receive a 20% discount on all purchases. Again, that is shopfreespirited.com, and that code is MP20. As the poet laureate of the Monte The Pharaoh YouTube channel, I will leave you with this. If you like what you see, go buy a tee. Heck, maybe 2 or 3. When your friends tell you, hey, you look like the bomb, send them over to shopfreespirited.com. All righty, and before we get started, our normal quick toast. Get Nikita, glass in hand.
Spinning.
Oh, there he is. All right.
You know what? All of a sudden, I saw that there were 3 were circling, and now all of a sudden, there I am. You know what I did though? It was on mute, and I took the mute off, but you could hear me. So, I don't know. It's a Polish machine. Don't worry about it.
All right. Well, welcome back. So you wanted our normal quick toast here. We're going to toast all the greats from back in the day who did what they did and made us believe when it was real.
But when we got Sal here and with his book and his connection with the great Bruno and just the anniversary passing Bruno.
Nikita froze.
Yeah, he's been froze on video since it started.
Well, Sal, let me real quick. I know you've been on a lot of these shows, including Monte The Pharaoh and Dan and Benny in the Ring. But for anybody who might have missed you until now, which probably isn't really anybody, but how did you get interested in wrestling? Who got you started? Was it a family member, a friend?
No, it was none of the things you might think. Several of the kids in the neighborhood knew about wrestling, and I would hear them mention Chief Jay Strongbow, Ivan Putski, Bruno Sammartino. Those are pretty much the only names that I remember. I had no interest in it whatsoever, to be quite honest with you. Then one Saturday, WOR used to show wrestling at 11 o'clock at night. But the Mets were playing on the West Coast. I believe the San Diego Padres. Well, those games started at 10 p.m. on the East Coast. Right. This was a weekend night and so forth, obviously. So they plugged the wrestling in at 5 o'clock. Well, we only had 5 channels in those days. So I turned on WOR. There was wrestling. There was nothing else to watch. I said, well, let me watch it. And the first guy I really had any real interest in, of course, Bruno wasn't really wrestling at the time. It was just spots here and there, was Ivan Putski. And I just started watching it from there. And that's it. But it was really, if the Mets had been playing on the East Coast, I would have probably still never seen it.
Now, what year is that, Sal?
I'm going to tell you it was probably 1978.
All right, so you bypassed the like what I had to dial through the UHF channels, and I found
I watched the UHF too later. I didn't, but I would normally watch that. But then I would find wrestling. We got Florida Championship Wrestling. We got All-Star Wrestling. But what I was seeing was, the Allentown tapings on WOR. But I found all the other stuff later.
Right. Okay. And then now, how did you want to being involved in the business? How did you make your way in?
It's a ridiculous story, really. A gentleman who was also my partner in the Wrestle Reunion events, which took the 3 that took place in 2005. We had been friends for many years. He had his own refrigerator repair business. We lived basically on the same street. A guy in our neighborhood named Dominic Marcello with a guy named, I found out later, a guy named Mike DeVanzo. These guys used to go to wrestling all over the place, went to the TV tapings every 3 weeks. And Anthony found out about this when he was there fixing the guy's refrigerator. He told him about me and what a big fan I was. This guy had pictures of everything. He told me he had a picture of the Grand Wizard without his stuff on, which was crazy to me. I couldn't imagine seeing that. And he asked him if he could bring me by the house. So he said, sure, you can. So one day he brought me by. He showed me all the pictures and stuff like that. And I think I bought some pictures from him. But I said, where do you get all of this? And he said, we go to the TV tapings in Allentown. And, he said, we go every 3 weeks. And I never knew that the tapings were even done in Allentown, because all Joe McHugh used to say was reference the State Athletic Commission. He didn't even say what state.
He didn't say what state, correct, yes.
And so I said, can I go? He said, yeah, if you're willing to split the expenses. So me, him, and Mike started going down there. Now, the thing was, they knew everybody. They had been really good in tight with Hulk Hogan, but he wasn't in the territory anymore. He wasn't around at that time. And they were in tight with the Samoans. They weren't around. They knew everybody else, and they were accepted, but they didn't have the real tight relationships with the guys in the territory at the time. But they brought me down there the first time. I believe the first time was when Buddy Rogers came back to the company. Professor Elliott Marin knew these guys very well. Many people know Professor Elliott. And next thing you know, I'm getting hired to work the door security at the door in Allentown. And I was watching the heel side in Hamburg the next night. And this went on until the Samoans came back to the territory. One day, Mike called me. Dominic couldn't get off of work all the time. Mike had his scheduled days off to be Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so he never had a problem. And he called. He said he got a letter from AFA telling him they were going to be the ones to replace Fuji and Saito. So, we just showed up down there. I met the Samoans on day one. And they took a liking to me right away, and they already liked Mike. And that was my way in.
Now, how old were you at that time?
18.
Okay. So
hey, do you still talk to Dominic Marcello? Because I got a ton of pictures from him over the years, Sal.
Dominic and Mike are both deceased.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
I'll tell you another thing.
It's been a long time, actually.
When you say friends with Hogan, Dominic was the one that told me that Hogan won the belt from the Sheik. He said he was.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we lost it.
He'll come back eventually. So, Sal, hopefully Nikita can hear this, but I'm kind of thrilled. I'm going to mark out here that I have the authors of my two favorite wrestling books ever. And I know that you recently posted something about Bruno's The Autobiography of Wrestling's Living Legend on social media. How did the revised book come out? I was fortunate enough to have Bruno sign the original version when I met him in Rico's in December 2017. Then when we met in Palm Harbor a couple of years later, you signed the newer version for me. How did the whole idea of the new version come about?
Well, this was the problem. Of course, whatever went on in the original version, I hadn't really started working with Bruno at that time. the book, I think there were 10,000 books printed. It was a bad relationship. Bruno ended up getting the ownership of the book. The big problem was that Bruno got tired. He felt bad for people, but, at the same token, I kept hearing about it, how people would say, I had to buy your book for $100 because, people would find out Bruno was making an appearance of people who bought the original 10,000 books. And when they did, they'd throw the book up on eBay. So I'm the type of guy who can only listen to something for so long. So I said, Bruno, look, why don't I see if I can buy some of these books off of eBay? See if we can get somebody to scan it into a Word document. I'll clean it up, because if you look through it, the wrestlers' names are spelled wrong. I mean, it was edited horribly. It really was. And I got Brian Thompson, used to be a close friend of Bobby Eaton's. He did the first level of editing to put out the second book. We threw a few extra pictures in, and we threw the book up. But Bruno was all for it, because now the book was going to be available. If anybody wanted the original book, they could get it for what was a reasonable price. And he wouldn't hear this complaining anymore, which meant I wouldn't hear about him hearing about the complaining anymore. So that was really what it was all about. And then the current and updated, and people told me to take the book down. And there was logic in that. Don't sell the old version anymore. But to be honest with you, people still seem to want to purchase the old version. And it is slightly different than the new version.
It
there
is,
were certain things Bruno wanted me to pull out. And we didn't agree on everything. But of course, I respected his wishes. I tried to explain to him why we didn't need to do that. But, it was personal to him, and he wanted it pulled out. Okay, so we pulled it out. But the book is still there. And like I said, it still sells from time to time. And under the format, doesn't mean anything. So eventually Bruno started opening up more in interviews. And I said, Bruno, listen, I listened to this interview you did, and you said this and you said that. He said, Sal, what do you expect me to do? I said, well, listen, if you're willing to open up, I said, why don't we take the stuff that we get complaints about in the original book, let's yank it and put in something that, is the truth, the complete truth, without any hidden secrets in it. So that's what we did. So I went through, pulled out all the stuff that people were complaining about anyway, and the real fans buying it didn't want that stuff. They called BS on it. Okay, so let's put the real stuff in there, and that's what we did. And that was it.
See, I love both. I mean, obviously, when I read the first, I knew he was still kayfabing it, but to me, that was Bruno. That was his style. And so when the second one came out, I was delighted. It's like, wow, this is different. But I loved them both.
Yeah, we don't really get, it's the real hardcore, everybody who thinks they understand the business. But I will say people seem to respect the last version. And the color pictures, I like to address the color book. The real Bruno fans buy the color book, and they're happy about it. What I will say, it was not our intention for the book to be so expensive. But when we talked to Amazon, we were going to have about 10 pages of color pictures. So we told them, we'll pay for 10 pages of color. And they explained to me that's not the way it works. If you have one color picture in the entire book gets printed like it's in color. And there's no way around that. So that's why that book is as expensive as it is. But the truth is, of anybody who's bought it, nobody's complained, because those color pictures are really pretty cool.
No, I have a bunch of friends who have the book, and like every single one of them treasures that book. They covet it. Yeah, it's just, and I love the tributes in the second book from guys like Mike Niggett, Bruno's friend, Dave Johann, and you. It's so many great tributes, and I mean, everybody was speaking from the heart.
Oh, there's no question. I really didn't get much kickback from anybody on doing it. Everybody was really excited to be a part of it.
But now, from what I heard from Bruno, and you just said it pretty much, that he was legitimately concerned that people who wanted the first book could not get it.
Oh, he was concerned. Well, they could get it. It's the price they had to pay to get it. Wasn't that?
Yeah.
Are you talking about when the first book went out of print, Sal?
Yes. The first book, there were only 10,000 copies printed. That was it. And those were the ones being put up for sale for 100 plus. And they would surprisingly go up for sale when Bruno was announced to make an appearance somewhere.
leave it to Bruno to be more concerned about the fans than money. I mean, just shows the kind of class he had.
Sure, absolutely. That's why we loved him, and I'm sure it just came back off of him. Sal, when you were writing the book, the revised version of it, how often did you talk to Bruno to get things squared away?
Often. Because I wanted everything to be accurate. I wanted to make sure I had his true thoughts. The only stuff that wasn't rewritten, it was edited, cleaned up, the first three
Right.
chapters, and that was the deal. You can do whatever you want, obviously with his approval. Do not touch the first three chapters. They're fine the way they are. But I told him, I said, look, I'm not going to change anything, but we are going to clean it up. And the editor of the book, and I want to say the reason the book is in the condition is in Colin Bowman, formerly with WCW Magazine. I'm a great friend of Jimmy Hart's. Jimmy introduced me to Colin. Took a long time to find an editor. I have a good friend of mine. She just very competent, did not want to do it. And she'd done some wrestling interviews in the past and stuff, but she just really was not on board with doing it. Finally, it hit me, and I called Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, I finally got an editor for the book. And he said, really? Who'd you get? I said, Jimmy, just think about it. He said, oh, Colin. I said, right. Finally hit me. And he really took it on as a passion project. When we did the 605 reunion in Orlando, Colin was there. He was a big part of that. And Bruno came down. It was his first time appearing in Orlando. So they met there. And I believe they had met one other time. But, Colin really took it on as a passion project as well. And he finally said, look, we got enough. Because, I mean, we could have made the book 1,000 pages, truth be told. But at some point, you got to decide. 568 pages is a lot of pages.
Yes, absolutely. I know from what you speak, because when Scott Teal took me,
I guess Scott took him and he didn't give him back.
they just get tired after a while. They read a couple of pages and they're done. That's why they say keep the matches short, because you lose the people. Too long and they get uninterested.
Yeah, you certainly can.
So I have a question about Bruno. Go ahead, Nikita.
You have a question about Bruno? Go ahead, Benny. Jeez.
Yes. Yeah. So, in the bio on Amazon, you mentioned that, and we all know that he's the only wrestler in the history of the business that had to ask to have the title be taken off of him, as opposed to every other wrestler who ever lived. But, he was tired. He was hurt. He missed his family. And when he first got the belt in '63, the New York territory wasn't doing very well. And he was in Toronto doing quite well. And so Bruno came in to turn the territory around. Fast forward 10 and a half years later to late '73, and they asked him to take the belt back. And I think they promised, or they told him that he would only have to do it for a year. Wound up doing it for 3.5. So my question is, I mean, there were so many great wrestlers back then, but what, and I know Bruno didn't even understand it. And what made Bruno so special? Because even me as a young fan back in the late '60s, I didn't know his story. I didn't know the whole thing about him being in Italy and being 83 pounds when he came to America, and that he was picked on and he built himself up to be the Superman. All I knew that this was my hero, and he was, to me, he was Superman, and he was a classy guy. What set him apart from every single wrestler who ever wrestled?
Well, keep in mind, first of all, back in the 60s and the days before, and even several years later, they were basically working in boxing rings. And rather than give Bruno time off to, have a little bit of a life and to heal from time to time, when they could have used the Indian and Monsoon and some of these other people, the tag champions, to fill up these B clubs, they had Bruno working every night. Well, 7.5 years of working in a boxing ring, and not just in New York. Think of the worldwide travel, those who wanted him here and wanted him there. That certainly was a problem. And he didn't ask to have the belt taken off. He demanded, because asking didn't get him anywhere. And he had to draw a line in the sand. But what makes him different is with Bruno, especially in his younger days when he was still wrestling. Like he always said to me, you never really got a chance to see me when I was doing all different kinds of things. Like people see him in the 80s are critical from time to time, a lot of punching and kicking. Well, okay, but that's not what it was in the 60s and 70s. You know, there was a lot more wrestling going on. He could do different things. But I believe what made him different was he knew that no matter who they were bringing in, he had to stay there and keep the territory healthy. So he adjusted his style to his opponent, where most people that were on top were looking for the opponent to adjust to them. Well, what does that give you? It gives you a lot of repetition. I don't care how big a fan you are. At a certain point, you're looking for something different. He didn't do that. He would do high spot matches with Mike Cicluna. He would do strongman stuff with somebody. He'd wrestle somebody who could wrestle.
Like
and then it wasn't the
yeah.
same thing all the time. Match, return, program, match, return. You know, like some of these guys that he worked with that he didn't really feel were qualified to headline the territory. Well, one, McMahon was doing favors. The old man was for different promoter friends. But he said, Sal, I didn't really mind because, to be honest with you, there were times when the champion just needed to go out and beat somebody. You know, not every time you show up, okay, we're going to have this. Oh, there's going to be a return. Maybe there's another return. You know, sometimes it was okay to just go out and beat a Tank Morgan or a Jess Ortega, these guys. And, you know, he just had to keep people interested. You know, other people could be very repetitive, and that just gets tiresome.
Well,
When
go ahead, Nikita.
You say you got involved in 78, Sal. Were you there when he returned to the Garden against Superstar in October?
No, I said when I got involved, that's when I started watching. The first match I believe I was ever at was Sammartino and Zbyszko at Shea Stadium.
Wow. Well, that had to be just eye-opening. Now, you obviously were not at the Philadelphia Arena. You were always at Allentown for the tapings.
Allentown, but I lived in New York, and we had a contact at Madison Square Garden. And you know what? It must have been before, because I remember bumping into Zbyszko and Bill Apter on the same night. Maybe the first night he was wrestling Bruno. But my dad is a boxing coach, has been for years and years. So he did a lot of stuff at Madison Square Garden, the Felt Forum. Also, his band used to play for the heavyweight fights in the Felt Forum. And he made a connection for me with a guy named Dan Bruno, who used to be, if you talk to Davey O'Hannon, he would know him. He was the guy at the table where the elevator was, and where everybody went up that way unless you were driving into the building. And actually, he was the first guy who told me that Ernie Roth had passed away. When I got there, he said, "Did you hear the Wizard passed?" He said, "No." And then Paul Vachon came in right behind, and I said, "Paul, did Ernie die?" And he said, "Yeah, he did." But so I would always go up that way. But I remember Zbyszko coming in, and Bill Apter. So I guess I was at a few matches before that. But it was basically the Bruno feud, I think, that got me, with Zbyszko, that got me out.
You know, Sal, one thing that I went back and I looked at, Bruno's matches from this first reign and then his second reign, and I didn't tabulate them, but you could see that he wrestled a lot less in the second reign per month. He might have wrestled a dozen times a month, maybe instead of 22. But I mean, it looked like he was wrestling everywhere in his first reign. I mean, he's wrestling at not just the Garden and Boston Garden, Philly Spectrum. He was wrestling in high schools.
Yeah, no, he had no time off. He was, whether A clubs or B clubs, he was working, and that ultimately was the reason why he ended up having to quit. And then keep in mind, the one promise that he made to Frank Tunney when he told him he was going to take the offer and go back to New York is Frank gave him his blessing, but he said, I need you to come back twice a month and make the Maple Leaf Gardens for me. And he did that for quite a long time. I think it was several years. So the first reign, he was being booked basically every night they worked, unless he was out of the territory, traveling somewhere, he was basically working. So you had no time for your body to heal. Now, the story of him coming back was the old man and Vince Jr. flew to Pittsburgh and asked him to come back. They met at the airport, and they told him it won't be like last time. You'll only work the A clubs, and you'll make good money. You'll have a few days off a week. And of course, if he wanted to go somewhere else and work, for Dick the Bruiser or whatever he wanted to do, he could. But, that was it. Well, at the end of the year, when he said, "Okay, guys, have you found anybody yet?" And of course they said no. And he said, "Bruno, I don't understand what the problem is. You're making great money. We kept our word. You're only working 3 or 4 days a week." He said, what's the issue?" And he said, "You know what? I thought about it. They were right." So I said, "Don't worry about it. I'll stay." And but then at 3.5, 4 years, whatever it was, then he said, "Now I'm done."
Well, plus he got a broken neck in the process. That couldn't have helped any.
No, it couldn't have.
But yeah, I mean, it's so funny now. Like living here in Tampa, I might see the WWE maybe once a year if I'm lucky. Maybe twice if I'm incredibly lucky. But I mean, back in the day, I saw my first match at the Island Garden in '68, which was a pretty small venue, and it was Bruno versus Tanaka. I saw him the next year at Sunnyside Garden versus, I think, Luke Graham. But I mean, you could see Bruno in a smaller venue where, like, nowadays you can't do that anymore. You have to go to a 20,000 seat arena to see any high caliber wrestling.
Well, the business has changed. The metrics have changed. I mean, if they really sold real merchandise in the '60s, what would Bruno have sold? If they had pay-per-view numbers, what would he have sold? It's really a different business today. It's judged on different criteria. The bottom line was, today TV ratings play a large portion because of the money. Well, these guys weren't getting that sort of a benefit from television. If anything, Jerry Jarrett, would say, basically the TV ratings are for one thing, to let me know how the Memphis Mid-South Coliseum is going to do on Monday night. If they had high ratings, they knew they were going to pack the Coliseum. If the ratings were a little bit lower than normal, they knew they probably wouldn't have a sellout. It's just all changed. And when Bruno did make a comeback at some point, he told me when he got to the dressing room, the rings had started to get a spring in them and stuff. And he told them guys, he said, "These rings are like trampolines." He said, if I had rings like this, I would have been champion for 20 years.
Right. Well, they always complain about Baltimore being one of the worst because it was high and it was a absolute boxing ring. But when Bruno got done with Zbyszko, and I guess Shea Stadium was probably it, and then they hit the Capitol Center and a few very other, he just about started to fade out.
That was perfect. Nikita said fade out. Nikita faded out. So
yeah.
There I am again.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
Okay. In his first book, he said he was in a Baltimore airport when he thought about retiring. And it was July 25th of '81. He wrestled King Kong Mosca in Baltimore. So it's like, wow. So Bruno left that night. He's sitting in the airport to go home. And that's where he decided, man, maybe it's time. And I guess nobody could walk in those shoes like that man did. But thank you for what he did, because, wow. What was he relating his feelings to you at that point?
Look, there was so many different things and times, when the Meadowlands was being built, he had promised the people that he would open the Meadowlands. So that was a holdup to wrestling George Steele. And then he went to Japan for 3 weeks. He didn't even know until he got there he was going to be Giant Baba's partner instead of opponent. But there was always one reason or another why he wasn't allowed to walk away. Bruno was more than happy to walk away, but nobody would ever let him do that, whether it's making appearances, whether it's coming back to appear on shows. And, look, the bottom line is when Bruno stopped being a full-time wrestler, there was only one reason Bruno was on a show, because the promoter didn't feel like they had a strong enough card with what they had. Because there's no promoter sitting around saying, how can I squeeze a high-priced guy in here that's really just going to turn people away because the house is already full? I mean, there's no logic in that. It doesn't happen. If Bruno was made to work, it was because the old man thought that he needed that. And Vince Jr., the same thing. They didn't plug him in on cards because they wanted to give away money to a guy who didn't want to do it to begin with. But when he did it, he was, he gave his all. I mean, you talk to different people, and, I was there for the cage match with Tito and him against Randy Savage and Adrian Adonis. The people were going crazy. I talked to the Honky Tonk Man, who was very proud. I guess Jake Roberts, I think it was, couldn't make it. And all they did was put a cryon on the bottom of the screen, and they ended up selling out the Boston Garden. But these are just facts. Anybody can make up any story they want about anybody, but this business comes down to dollars and cents. No promoter is booking somebody because they have too much money and they want to give it away. Not somebody like Bruno. Now, Bruno, as a matter of fact, of course, promoted Pittsburgh. J.J. Dillon, who was a great help to me in my career, knew Bruno from when he was a referee. J.J. got help from Bruno several times. And I guess Bruno was J.J. was living in Michigan, I think, or Ohio, one of the two. He drove down to the arena. He knocked on the door, asked to see Bruno. And I don't know exactly who it was. It might have been Bruno's father-in-law or another guy there that was working in the territory. They went and got Bruno, and they were shocked that Bruno, knew him and everything. And right on the spot, he said, from now on, this guy not from now on, but starting next week, this guy is on every card. End of story. I don't care if you have to add a match. Now, that was a gift for somebody Bruno really liked and appreciated, who had done the right thing for many years. But you don't see people giving away headliners for no reason. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would anybody do that?
Well, who got you started promoting, Sal? Because Bruno was on a lot of your cards. But was it Alpha? Because I know you got tight with them, the Samoans.
Extremely close. They were like family, and I knew the Samoans, long before I knew Bruno. First of all, I got in the autograph show business, learning the business of that out in Los Angeles through Ray and Sharon Courts from Spring Hill, Florida. They had the Hollywood Collectors Show. They were the first ones to have celebrities come do autographs. Their first guy was Robert Shane, born in Yonkers, New York, which I found out later. He played Inspector Henderson on Superman. He was the first celebrity that was willing to come out to an autograph show and do things. And it just grew. And it still today is called the Hollywood Show. They sold it a few years back. And a guy named Dave Elkaby took it over. And he's still got the thing running. That's how I learned the autograph show business. Well, somewhere around 2003, 2004, there have been some conventions going on in Charlotte, and they were good conventions. There's nothing wrong. They had good talent there, and it was kind of a new thing, and they had huge crowds. And I just thought, this could be bigger. And so I put on the event in Tampa. Trying to get buildings and stuff was tough. But when it's all said and done, the biggest thing for me was going to be getting Bruno down in Tampa, because Bruno didn't travel in the winter. I mean, that was a big deal to him. He basically said, don't book me on anything from November to April if I've got to travel somewhere. But he was willing to do it for me. And, then 5-6 years later, he was willing to come out to Los Angeles when he wasn't, and when I got there, he told me, he said, the doctor told me not to do this. He said, I told him I had no choice. I had to do it. And of course, people out there hadn't seen Bruno in Los Angeles for a long time. But my first promoting was a spot show at my high school for our alumni association. We had Rocky Johnson, S.D. Jones, and Tony Atlas against Roddy Piper, Paul Orndorff, and David Schultz.
Wow.
One blast on McMahon's program. We did turn away business. I mean, just that little announcement that Howard Finkel would make breaking in, we literally turned people away. And then we wanted to have another event. They had promised us a second event if we did well on the first one. Then they told me I couldn't have it, that we couldn't have a live event, that I had to do something called WrestleMania. And that's all they do. They do WrestleMania, and they gave me no details except that Mr. T was involved. We agreed to do it, but they said your venue's too small. So we went to the Westchester Community College in Valhalla, New York. And that was big enough. It would hold enough people. And that time, WrestleMania was in the afternoon. People were lined up with their lunch at 8 o'clock in the morning. Tickets were all sold out. You couldn't get any tickets. People were calling 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get tickets. But we packed that place too. And that's how I got started promoting. And after that, when Alpha and Sika left the WWF, then I helped Alpha with what he called the Trans World Wrestling Federation. And we did shows and we went overseas and all different kinds of things. So I learned, look, when guys like Alpha, who, of course, many fans probably thought couldn't teach you anything, could teach you a lot of things. Jimmy Hart was always a huge help. Bruno was a huge help. And there were a lot of other guys, that you would listen to for bits and pieces. A guy like Charlie Fulton, who everybody knows his name,
Oh, yeah.
but I just remember he said, Sal, people think throwing up a sign and saying wrestling's here and then everybody comes running. It doesn't. It's work. He said, I'd be in towns and there'd literally be nobody there. He said, the following week, you'd be there. They throw Thunderbolt Patterson's name on the thing, and you were turning people away from the building. So, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's tough. And you see it's still tough today. A lot of independent shows don't do well. Then other people go out there, they break their tail, and they do well. And it's really got to be guerrilla marketing, because the more traditional marketing is far too expensive for an independent show unless you have a lot of sponsors.
Sal, you've done every job in the wrestling business: referee, manager, wrestler, booker, promoter, author. Which is one of them in particular your favorite?
I guess we've had the most fun, just working the independent scene in North Carolina. I mean, I got a chance to do a lot of good stuff with refereeing in the NWA, especially. Dusty and JJ trusted me with a lot of stuff on the events I was on, and I was really happy about that. And the one thing that I want to say is I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know the relationship of JJ and Bruno, and because I didn't know that much about JJ, but I had to, at the last minute, do TV tapings in Philadelphia at the Civic Center there. The cage match we did there is on the internet with both Dusty and Bobby Eaton. The bottom line is, when JJ came down to ringside with the Horsemen, he said, listen, well, first of all, you're doing okay, because I was having to referee everything by myself. The lights are hot, and I said, no, I'm good. He said, well, see me afterwards. Well, next thing I know, I'm on a lot of American bashes and, doing well and having a lot of fun with that. And I was like very, very happy. Even though they were long drives for me, the money was fine and just being given the opportunity. But I didn't know everything that Bruno had done with JJ. And I think in some ways, it made me feel like JJ was paying that forward to another referee who was out there making a real effort and really trying to get things done, because that's what it was for JJ. But I guess ultimately the most fun I've had is just working the independent scene with David Isley and Coach Steele in the Carolinas as the Rat Patrol, and just being a heel coward manager and stuff was probably the most fun. But I can't tell you that I did anything in the business that I didn't enjoy. You name it, we had a good time doing it. Yeah. And I was happy. But, when our music hit, even though they were not big crowds or anything, those people despised us. And that's what we were there for.
That's the name of the game. That means you're doing a great job, right?
We needed police escorts to the car. The local hero there, he's no longer with us either, a guy named the Wild Thing, Willie Clay. The people in those little towns loved him. And, whatever we did, we eventually, me and David Isley, and I don't remember right now who our other. I guess it was a guy named the Buddha. He's gone too. We ended up working with the Freebirds and Willie Clay on the last night before Michael Hayes went to work for the WWF. And at Alpha's funeral, I reminded him of that. We should have been their last match, but Michael ended up getting another booking, or Jimmy did, and they went straight to that other booking. We put them on second, and they went down there, and then they were finished, and Michael went straight to WWF from there.
Okay. So with the Wrestle Reunion, how many of them were there, and what were the various venues? I know there was one in Tampa, there was one in Los Angeles. You said that was the one that Bruno, I remember you telling me that a long time ago, that Bruno did not want to travel that far, but out of gratitude to you, he came. What were the other venues?
Well, in 2005, the original Wrestle Reunions, the one the gentleman Anthony Attanasio was involved in, we have the DoubleTree in Tampa. Then we had Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, which is where Bruno had his last physical interaction with Larry Zbyszko. And then we had Davie, Florida. Now, we did some very unique things on those events, and we finally have control of those tapes. I'm hoping that the WWF or one of the other major organizations buys them, because none of this stuff has bin seen. And even 20 years later, we still get requests. When is anybody going to see this stuff? And I haven't seen it myself, other than the little sizzle reel we made, which is about 2 minutes. We've never really seen any of it. But we had things like Dory and Terry Funk fought against America's Most Wanted the last time they ever challenged for the NWA Tag Team title. We had Jeff Jarrett against Tully Blanchard. Might have been Tully's only opportunity to have a shot at the NWA title. We had all 3 of the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette in a tag match against the Rock and Roll and the Fantastics. We had all kind of one-time things or culminations of feuds from 20 years ago. Steve Dr. Death Williams at Valley Forge made his comeback against a guy named Mike Kalua. Mike was a good hand. He's still working today, and he was perfect.
I've seen him before.
Steve hadn't been in the ring in a long time. He was injured, and he was extremely concerned. I tried to reassure him. And when afterwards he came to me, he said, "You picked the right guy. Thank you." Team 3D, the Dudley Boys. We were the first event for them. They left the WWF, and they did our show first. So, and because of what went on, we had no idea that it couldn't be the Dudley Boys. So we had to make a last-minute change, and we had to call them Team 3D. A lot of things went on. Dusty Rhodes against Terry Funk. Mick Foley and Dory and Terry Funk against the 3 Midnight Express. Many things that the important thing to me was I didn't want people to come see something they could see on any independent show around the country at one time or another. I wanted them to see unique things that weren't being pushed all over the place.
Yeah, those sound like very unique matches. I don't think I've seen. So Cornette actually got in the ring with yes. There's a wiki page for the Wrestle Reunion matches. Then Michael Bakikio of High Spots, who has taken over what was Wrestle Reunion, turned it into WrestleCon. We worked together 2010, 11, and 12. I told him I wanted to walk away at that time. Sometimes I regret that. Sometimes I'm thrilled to do it, that I did it. But he's turned WrestleCon into even a bigger thing than Wrestle Reunion ever was. And he went with the times. He knows what he's doing. He's very good at it. For a while, he had my hotel contacts, which were a big help. But he's become very good at this stuff. So he does that every year now. But we ran events in 2010, 11, and 12 in LA. And, we did good. We did combination shows with Ring of Honor. I remember seeing this Kevin Owens. I didn't know most of these people. I booked the legends, and Michael worked with the others. And this Kevin Owens, after 5 seconds in the ring, I looked at Michael. I said, "This guy's going places. There's just no two ways about it." But we did good. We had good, solid crowds working with Kerry Silken and the Ring of Honor guys, and it was good. And of course, he brought Bruno. We were doing an event, New York Comic Con. I had Jimmy Hart there with me, and you got a picture of probably in the book of Yvonne Craig, who played Batgirl, with Jimmy Hart, me, and Bruno. But Kerry had wanted, and I think it was worked out through Gary Juster, if I remember, but through one of them, we were able to just walk over to, I guess, is that Hammerstein Ballroom, I think is where it was. Okay.
And Bruno was concerned it wasn't really his crowd. I have to say that Ring of Honor crowd stepped up and let Bruno know how much he was appreciated. And, he really enjoyed being there. And it was so simple to travel, because literally all we did was walk a few blocks. Then we had to go back to the autograph show the next morning. So it was a great thing. And I was glad to. I had never been to a Ring of Honor show. I was glad to meet Kerry and some of these other guys. We got a picture, me, Bruno, and Brian Danielson. And I think there's some other pictures running around too of the event that night. Bruno made a speech, and everybody was happy.
Okay. They got Steve Gennarelli from the great Stick to Wrestling podcast saying, "Thanks for Wrestle Reunion, Sal. I got to meet my hero Bruno at your event." I mean, I bet like you've heard that many, many times.
We have. Nobody believed Wrestle Reunion was going to happen. At the time, there had not been an event so large. Nobody believed this thing was going to happen. Matter of fact, Clear Channel, which we ended up, things did not go well there. But Clear Channel called me a couple of days before and said, "Listen, We're afraid nobody's going to show up when we get there. And I said, well, what do you mean? We've sold tickets. And he said, we're not talking about fans. We're talking about you. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, man, we've shown up to places in an empty parking lot. I said, well, it ain't going to be this one. I said, we're absolutely going to be there. And we were. It was just a massive, massive event. And all the guys, some of them were just so excited. Some of them had no idea what they were booked for. Like Marty Jannetty came in, and I had talked to a guy named Gorgeous Gary Royals, a very longtime friend of mine, and quite honestly made me look better in the ring than a lot of people ever would have taken the time to do. He's one of these guys that was just a brilliant worker, like George South, his tag team partner. These guys could make anybody look good.
Yeah.
And Gary had been around a lot of places. He's a former NWA junior heavyweight champion. And he had worked for a long time in Kansas City with Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. And so I said, well, Gary, who do you want to work with? And he said, well, I'd love to work with Shawn. He said, I know that's not possible, but maybe Marty Jannetty. Now, I didn't go into a whole lot with Jannetty. I just booked him, and he came down. He had no idea what he was walking into whatsoever. And, when he found me, he said, can you tell me who I'm working with? I said, yeah, Gary Royal. And he said, Gary Royal, you mean the real one? I said, yeah, the real one. So Gary came to me later when Marty saw him in the dressing room. He said, man, how did I ever get booked on this? And he said, I suggested that, I wanted to work with you. And the truth is, from that event, Jannetty went straight to the WWF. Bob Orton Jr., who, believe me, if it wasn't for Buddy Rose, he would have never did it. He actually volunteered to stay home. And after I begged him to do it, but Buddy Rose said, just call him and tell him I said this. And Bob did it. He went straight back to the WWF. And then when we got Vader out of retirement, after he did some of the Wrestle Reunion events, these were the ones more in 2010, 11, around there, he went straight back to the WWF. So they were keeping an eye on us, but they'd also work with us. We'd get talent, and even if they wanted to bring the talent in, we always had a very cooperative environment, which I was very happy of. And when Bruno went in the Hall of Fame, I had already had him introduced or advertised for WrestleCon. And Triple H was, of course, Bruno said, look, I've already promised Sal I'm doing this. He's already advertised me. They sent Steven Regal over to take Bruno's place. And, the fans were extremely excited to meet Steve. And when he got there, I said, look, you're replacing Bruno. He says, yeah, I know. I'm a little bit worried about that. And I said, you see that line over there? There's no worries you need to have, because every one of those people's waiting for you. And he was very nice. I'll never forget. We were running out of time. He's only booked for a certain amount of time. And I said, Steven, look, I know you're supposed to leave. He said, Sal, I'm not leaving the building until everybody gets what they want. And I said,
very good.
Guess what? He said, Sal, I'm not leaving the building until every one of those people gets what they want. Okay. I've never forgotten that, because let's face it, there's a lot of guys in this business that wouldn't have done that.
Oh, yeah.
Been on a lot of shows and seen just the opposite, Sal, without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to have a good opportunity to do a lot of things, and Alpha put me in a lot of positions to do different things. And Nikita Koloff is the one that got me in with the NWA, and for whatever reason, Dusty had some faith in me and put me in some pretty tough positions. Where he had to have faith, because these things had to go well. And Sherry Martel got me booked in the AWA. And, I did some things there. Tommy Rich and Kevin Kelly and Bockwinkel and Zabisco, and did some really good matches. Ray Stevens, had some faith in me there as well. And Nick Bockwinkel was a huge help to me, and Snuka was, and things like that. I mean, look, who's ever going to think a guy like me, one of my last matches, I think my two last matches, my tag team partners were Scotty 2 Hotty and Jimmy Snuka. And in the last match that I had to date, anyway, my boots are still in my closet, was Demolition and me against Jimmy Hart and the Nasty Boys. I mean, in 1978, wow. If you tell me that kind of thing, I tell you, you're out of your mind.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, every name you mentioned, it was like a certifiable legend. Sal, I got to ask you a question. So I've been a fan since '68. I've seen how wrestling has changed over the last, now it's 57 years. Boy, it's scary to even think that. But I wanted to ask your perspective, somebody who's on the inside looking out. We asked our guest last week, if the average wrestling fan was better off in 50 years ago than 2025, from the sense that you had the affordability of going to your local arena. You could probably go to a lot more shows on an annual basis. Now you can watch wrestling 24/7. There's no more. You don't have to wait for the magazines anymore. You can
Right.
Literally are deluged with information on the internet and anything else you want to see. So, who's better off in your opinion?
Look, I mean, I don't know who was better off: people who got to watch Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, or the people who got to watch Don Mattingly, and some of the Tom Seaver. I mean, it's hard to say. It's different generations. It's different things. The shows are much bigger and more spectacular today, but fans were more rabid. You watch some of this old stuff from Allentown, and people literally lost their minds over stuff. I think it's hard to say who's better off. What do you want? Who was better off? Guys in New York that got to see the people once a month, or guys in Georgia that got to see Tommy Rich wrestle Buzz Sawyer every week for 2 years, and pack the place in and stuff like that. And you talk about the magazines, of course, Bill Apter, George Napolitano. We all look for those magazines. And then there were, the local promoters in New York that ran these spot shows. You had your Tommy D's, your Mitch Seinfelds, guys that I worked with. There was a few other people up in the Connecticut area. And then, then Gary Juster started bringing some of this stuff to the AWA. I don't know if anybody had it better, but certainly every generation had it different. How often did you want to go to the live matches? But in those days, you couldn't go meet your favorite stars. You couldn't take pictures with them. If you were lucky, they were standing in the ring. They signed a few autographs. So who has it better? I mean, I don't really know. I think it's a matter of individual choice. The guys today are very talented. Unfortunately, at these sad moments of the Samoans, funerals, those guys are missed in my world tremendously. Who would ever think that, I call off up, hey, I need a tag team partner. You got to jump on a plane. Hey, Sika, listen, so-and-so had to drop out. I really need a partner. Can you, who's thinking of that? And now their children and their relatives have taken over the business. I got to meet some of them because I hadn't seen some of these guys since they were little kids. And, they're very cool, very respectful, very talented. They honor what their relatives did, but yet they're blazing a course in a new time.
Well, I mean, they had to be. It was Sika was Roman Reigns' dad, correct?
Sika is Roman Reigns' dad, and
how proud was he of Roman Reigns?
I never got a chance to talk to Sika about it, but I've heard of different stories and different things, and I'd say he's extremely proud. His son rose to the top of the industry, and of course, he helped get him ready. And then, I started in this business with the Tonga Kid and Rikishi. We were all young together, and now Rikishi's sons and Tonga's son are paving a path for themselves, and they'll probably be stars for another generation or more. These guys are young and they're tough, and I think all the Samoan people are happy. Of course, Sika lost his son, Matt. That was part of 3-second warning. And, of course, Yokozuna, my buddy Rodney, he's gone. And, the other Umaga is gone. And, all these losses hurt the family, but those that are alive still are very proud of the history that was paved and of their family.
Yeah, Justin, when you see the family tree and all the great wrestlers, it's just amazing.
Yeah, and I knew Afa's wife Lynn before even he did, because they weren't there. These were girls, her sister Jane and their mother Yolanda. They would come down in town all the time. Also, it was like a family there. Once I got involved and knew everybody. With every 3 weeks, it was like a thing. We'd stay in Allentown. We'd get up, we'd drive to Hamburg the next day, and then everybody would head for home, and it was just a good time and tremendous memories. I never saw Bruno in that environment. Joel Goodhart was the one who got me. Blackjack Brown introduced me to Bruno over the phone. We spoke every week due to that gab line he had going. And then Joel Goodhart wanted to promote Zbyszko, managed by Paul Heyman, against David, managed by Bruno. So he asked me to intervene. Bruno finally, between myself and David, Bruno finally agreed to do it. And that's when I met Bruno for the first time. And for the most part, we were together for many years after that. I got to referee. Paul Heyman was a manager. Just the idea that we were working with Bruno was insane. You know, I mean, you couldn't picture it. Paul was very appreciative. I was extremely appreciative. And I thank Joel Goodhart for that, because that's a relationship that went on, you know, forever. And, you know, I was connected. People ask me, why me? I don't know.
Just lucky, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, why JJ? You know, there were a lot of referees. Why JJ? Who knows? But Bruno had a world of respect for him. And, you know, he mentioned Davey O'Hannon over and over and over again, but I hadn't met Davey. I was on my first show, or my second show, actually. Him and Zbyszko were on it, but I was a new guy. I didn't say. I worked a couple of matches, one with Larry Sharp, one with Damian Kane and Larry Winters. And Davey did a run-in the last match, but I didn't know him. But Bruno spoke very highly of him. I got to know him on the way to the funeral. Him and JJ drove out there together.
Davey's such a nice guy. Great guy.
Yeah, he really is. Really, really is. I wish I had known him sooner. He's one guy that I regret that I didn't know many years ago.
Yeah, he's been on our show a couple of times. Always very gracious with his time. Yeah, just one of the good guys. But Sal, when I heard Nikita mention you as a guest, you know, my immediate thought was Money in the Bank, because you've been on my Dan and Benny show several times. You've been on Monte The Pharaoh. I've seen you on many, many other podcasts, but your interviews are always informative and entertaining. And I want to just thank you for taking the time to appear with us tonight on When It Was Real.
No problem. I appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences and talk about the guys that I really, you know, bond with. And, you know, some of them are gone, but, you know, Stan Lane is a very close friend of mine from the Midnight Express, and Jimmy Hart, and I'm still in regular communication with them. And then there's so many other guys that I worked with that I appreciate, like Bill Eadie, the Masked Superstar, and Demolition. I mean, working with him over the years has really just been a pleasure. And, you know, of course, Hulk Hogan is always kind, and, you know, to me, and I'm glad of that. Very happy. You know, he was in there. I've got a picture with him. Was taken the day after he won the belt. They were in the Garden. We showed up in Allentown, and because Mike DeVanzo knew him, as soon as we got to the George Washington Lodge, he took me right to Hogan's room. And there's a good chance I got the first picture ever taken with him after the belt, because you assume he left the Garden, at least for somebody who wasn't with the company or wasn't the wrestling magazines. I'm sure he got up the next morning, pretty much drove to Allentown. He probably didn't have much fan interaction, and I've never seen any other picture from that day. So right. I may actually have the very first one. Yeah.
You truly blessed, my friend. And I want to give many thanks to everyone. We had a nice, lively crowd. Great chat room tonight for When It Was Real. Just like we mentioned, we have some great stuff planned in the future. So please hit the like and subscribe buttons so you won't miss any episodes on this great Monte The Pharaoh YouTube channel. I urge you to check our channel out. There's literally a treasure trove of excellent interviews and content on it, even a couple with Sal. It's a couple of great interviews with Sal. And we'll be back next week to take you on another awesome trip in the wrestling Wayback Machine. So for the great Nikita Brezhnikov, wherever he is, and for our wonderful guest, Sal Corrente, this is Benny Scala.
Hey, Benny, can I say one other thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you guys ever book me again, tell Nikita not to be so shy.
Yeah, right? I don't know what happened. Maybe the IRS is after him or something like that.
I hate it, but anytime, you know, I'm happy to come back if you want me.
No, we will gladly take you up on that offer. So I have to do my weekly poem, and what Christine Fortunato, new member, welcome to the Monte The Pharaoh channel. Welcome to When It's Real. We're glad to have you. But I got to leave you with my poem. Thanks for watching When It Was Real. It's so nice remembering how we would feel when watching our heroes of yesteryear and wishing those days could still be here. Have a great night, folks. And thanks again, Sal.
Thank you. Bye-bye.